Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you, Shireen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I see everybody's already gotten into the spirit of getting this networking session going. You'll notice that I've muted everybody except Shireen and Brad for the session. I'm going to, for those that don't know me, I'm Nadia Singh, the Events and Digital Manager at the Cape Chamber of Commerce. So once again, from the Cape Chamber side, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to Shireen. And she's going to talk you through the proceedings for the morning. Thereafter, she will introduce you to Dr. Bradley Beira, MD Advisory Group. Thank you, Brad, for joining us this morning. Brad will take us through a presentation. We will follow that up with a Q&A. Thereafter, we will do some networking, and Shireen's going to explain how we do that, and we will end the morning. So thank you again for joining, and I'm going to hand you over to Shireen.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and good morning, everybody. Welcome. Just in case you have that occupational hazard and you don't know where you are, you're currently attending a Zoom chat with the Cape Chamber, and we are just so absolutely thrilled to have you participate in this networking event. And we really do thank you for your time, and the fact that you are wanting to be here means that you are wanting to look after yourself, you're wanting to look after your business, and you're wanting to look after the people that work with you and for you. So thank you so much for joining this networking event. It's going to be a really informative one. We have been blessed to be able to have Dr. Bradley Beira with us today. He's been chatting a little bit with us informally before this, but just to introduce him, he is the MD of the advisory group, and he has an incredible CV. So I'm not going to go through his entire CV, but I want to tell you a little bit about him. He's the corporate advisor with 19 years of board and executive experience in South Africa and multinationally. His expertise in the application of risk-managed approaches to compliance, governance, legal, and regulatory frameworks. And he, in the advisory group, retains seasoned executives to provide professional guidance for corporate challenges. Quite a mouthful, but geez, this guy is extremely educated. He has studied all over the world. He is currently based in Johannesburg in South Africa. He's from South Africa. He's proudly South African. He's held numerous board positions, and he has been the author of many publications. One to mention that is actually a Services CETA accredited program for the design of health, lifestyle, and wellness management. Today, he is going to be presenting to us, and he's going to be speaking about stress management, a topic that I think is very apt, and I think that is very important with regards to where we're at in terms of COVID-19. There's a lot of emotions going wild. People are experiencing a lot of feelings, anxiety, and so on and so forth. And Brad's going to take us through his presentation and really get us thinking about what we can do individually as well as to help other people. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Dr. Brad. And Brad, thank you once again for being here with us.
Hey, Shireen, thanks. Hi, everyone. No pressure after that introduction. I feel a little overwhelmed. Shireen, you asked a question. We have a 9-slide presentation, which is really just a guidance and orientation presentation that, if you wouldn't mind putting up, it'll be great. It's limited to 9 slides because when I was in practice, I was a chiropractor to start my career back in the early 90s. When I started that, the journey that we went on was, how bad can it be? People would come in with headaches and back pain and stress, and I would say, well, what's the problem? This isn't so tough. How hard can business be? It turns out that business is actually quite tough, and life is quite tough, and the relationship between those got me down a journey to talk what at that stage we spoke about something called the stress of success. And then it became, how do we manage resilience? And then it was, how do we stay mindful in the course of work? And when I joined the business schools, talking on their accelerated leadership programs on stress, the quid pro quo was they taught me about business management. So I've run my own businesses since 2000. And so it's only 20 years. So I'm still learning about the challenges of running one's own business and managing one's own staff. But at that stage, there was a book on venture capital by a guy called Rob Adams, The book is for those of you that want to read it, and I'll refer to a couple of books if you're interested. And just let me know if it's yes or no. The book is called A Good Hard Kick in the Arse. And it's written by a guy called Rob Adams. But basically what he says is, amongst other things, if you can't say it in 9 slides, don't say it. So this is a 9-slide presentation in keeping with that, including the introduction. So the first slide you can see is the trust equation. And really, trust is how we view the world and how we allow ourselves to decide whether something is good or bad. The higher a level of trust we have with it, the more the stress that we feel is a positive stress. And the lower the level of trust that we have, the more we regard the stress as being a negative stress. So there's a big perception to that. So, Shireen, am I asking you or Nadia to change slides as we go?
So you'll be asking Nadia. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So in terms of the trust equation, one of the colleagues I work with, a woman called Maud Letzler, is an advocate at the bar. She sent me this picture the other day. I don't care. I'd rather sink than call Brad for help. And it's often what we have in our own worlds is we think, well, I can do this. I'm fine. I don't need perspective. I don't need anyone's input. I'm just going to hang in through that. So what we're going to do, and I'll be guided very much by the kind of comments that you send through if you want to, is talk about 5 key things. The first is our brain and how our brain works, because regardless of any views beyond that, the processing of information and how we feel about it comes from our brain and from our neurochemistry. And a lot of the issues that people are faced with is because they're not only are they processing information in different ways, but the chemicals in their brain are heightening or dampening some of their emotions. So that's number one. Then the second is what I've called the 4-3-2-1 principle. Radical candor being how we speak and what we say is the second piece. What we think about, the introspection, how we treat ourselves and others, the being present piece, and knowing yourself ultimately being the fourth piece. So that's the goals of what we'd like to talk about. And it all relates ultimately to when you wake up in the morning, the hardest thing about getting started is putting your feet on the floor. Once you've got your feet on the floor, the day starts to progress in a relatively nice way. Doesn't mean that it's always doing what we want, but that adage of put your feet on the floor and make your bed are key components to establishing structure. Now, I don't know how many of you right now, if we could go on to the next slide, please, have gone through this, what was quite a nice COVID-based, how I choose to spend my time series of bubbles. And the first is I get irritated easily, I panic buy, I act like a victim, and I hoard. And those are quite normal first responses that we have to any stress. It doesn't have to be COVID stress. Frustration and a lack of control allows you to get irritable, and it almost gives you a permission to, let's call it, take a straight line approach rather than use your EQ. So instead of saying, well, let's pause and reflect on this, you start to say, it's like this, and you become more emphatic. And the more emphatic you become, the more confrontational that creates the environment, and the more adrenaline you get. So it's the adrenaline and the cortisol, the two stress hormones, which drive your fear response. So I'll ask this as a question, maybe as a good way to start. How many of you get to the point sometimes where you just want to leave? You want to walk out, you want to yell and scream, and you want to run away. And if you don't, you want to bash the computer or crush the phone or throw something against the wall. Hell yes, says Dave. And that's your fight or flight mechanism. That's your adrenaline kicking in. And we have adrenaline. It's what we are. We built by design to respond to circumstance. Now, the more we have a circumstance, the more we become familiar with it. And the more familiar we are, the easier it is to manage the circumstance. So that means your adrenaline levels drop. So the first time you see something that's, oh, wow, look at this motion, or I can't believe I'm locked down, I better buy everything I need, and then I hate everyone. And you wake up in the morning and you're not in a bad mood, but you're not in a good mood either. And you say, if one person does one thing, and that quite quickly becomes when that person does that thing. And that's the effects of adrenaline and cortisol on your emotion state. Does that make sense to everyone? I hope so. So that's part A. Part B is you've got a separate hormone, and that hormone is called cortisol. And when you're stressed, cortisol is released. And what cortisol does, amongst other things, is it gives you these 4 characteristics. And I know it's not applying to any of you, but you probably know somebody who it might be applying to. The first thing is it changes your appetite and it helps you put on weight. So you have weight gain. The second thing that it does is it affects the way your blood cells mature, and so you're more susceptible to infections. So you get more snot or more ear infections or more chest infections. And you can call it nasal rhinorrhea or discharge, mucopurulent infections, but we used to joke and call it snot. It's the stuff that comes out of your nose. The third thing is it affects your sleep. So either you can't get to sleep or you wake up at 3 in the morning and you can't go back to sleep. So your natural sleep pattern and rhythm changes. And then the fourth is it changes your moods and you become more grumpy, more irritable, more susceptible to feeling like somebody's picking on you as opposed to just making a comment. So those are the signs. If you've got any of those or some of those signs, you're in that fear zone and you're living through your cortisol and adrenaline. So I'm hoping that makes sense and you can tick some of those boxes and say, yeah, that's probably me. We move out of that, that fear zone and we get into that learning zone as we start to get more familiar with the environment. And then we start saying, how can I manage this differently? We used to joke, and this was before the coffee culture, and say, if it makes the water brown, it's bad for you. So if you can't see the bottom of the cup, it's bad for you. If the food comes out of a wrapper, it's bad for you. So sugar, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, processed foods are things that you should be avoiding. But they're great comfort foods because they also stimulate your cortisol levels. So as you go from your cortisol response into how you learn, you start making different eating choices. And you go one of 2 ways. You either eat much less or you comfort eat much more. The more you comfort eat, the worse you'll feel, the more headaches and restlessness you'll get. The better you eat, the calmer you feel, the better you sleep, and the more relaxed you are. And then finally, the last piece of this, and this is the piece now where we start then talking about going into your growth zone, to say, well, this is where we are. How do we make the best of it? We dress up for our Zoom meetings. We wear shoes, or we stop wearing shoes, or we comb our hair, or we don't comb our hair, is where you're in the growth zone. And that growth zone is, what am I learning from this? What am I taking out of this? And there's a lot of introspection that happens in that. There were a lot of series on mental health that came out in the early parts of this lockdown that said, how will my relationship look with my colleagues? How will my relationship look like with my employees? How will my relationship look like with my spouse or my loved one or my kids at the end of this? Because you've got to now get into real communication. You can't say, I'm too busy and leave. Now it's, I'm too busy and okay, I'm still here because obviously I'm not too busy. And you have to then begin the engagement. So that's the challenge of the growth cycle. And it kicks us then into, how do we grow and how do we move between those 3 zones of fear and learning and growth? Because every day you're going to have something that makes you a bit more anxious. Every day you've got the opportunity to reflect on yourself, and every day you can choose to say, I'm fine as I am, I'm not changing, or maybe there's something that I can do that's slightly different. And that takes us through those phases. So you should coexist in all of them. And just outside of the immediacy, we all go through phases where, when we've been working too hard or we don't feel like we've got the emotional support, we go buy stuff. And it could be go buy food or go buy a new car or go do something restless, because the minute that we get into an environment where we feel we're not in control and we start experiencing that negative stress, we start looking at compensation behaviors. And those compensation behaviors are quite reckless. And I'll talk about them very briefly, and then we'll move on to the 4-3-2-1 principle. So I worked with a series of welfare structures back through the last 10 years. And one of the things we always ask the question of is, why do people relapse into addictive behaviors? So ask yourself the question now, am I an addict? You don't have to answer it, just ask it. And when I talk about that, it means, am I a person who goes back to a particular type of series of behaviors, or I go back into my bad behavior cupboard when I'm stressed? So when this all started, the conversation was, well, we tend to think about addicts as people who take amphetamines, ketamines, narcotics, and alcohol. And so what happened is, when we started looking at this and when the communication started to come through, people started to say, well, what happens when you put a person in rehab? You say, well, they can't have alcohol and they can't and or have narcotics. So then you start looking and the ashtrays are full and they're having these huge sippy cups of coffee with Red Bull inside or other caffeine drinks, and they're eating huge amounts of chocolate and candy. Not that any of you do any of that, but that's the first substitute is caffeine and sugar and nicotine. Then they started saying, okay, well, what happens if we reduce that? What are the other behaviors we see? And so addiction also includes the following things: gambling. How many of you have been online doing online shopping and buying more shopping? So gambling, compulsive shopping, workaholism, exerciseholism. In other words, working more than, like me, I only work about 60 hours a week. And when I'm not working, I like to trail run. So I run 6 to 8 hours a week. There's nothing addictive about my behavior at all, except that it's about 40% over the upper limits of normal. So we have those. We also have pornography, and we have rage, and we have codependency. All comes out during our stresses. So one of the things that you might want to do is have a look and say, where in your life are you being triggered? So when you have negative stress, you will trigger into some of these default behaviors. You will go find a relationship that's destructive for you, or you will burn down the relationship you're in. You'll pick a fight with other people, or you'll deliberately do stuff that you know will create an emotional response in them, so that you can have this heightened response back. And then that raises the adrenaline, and it raises your endorphin levels, and it raises some of the chemicals in your brain, and that gives you that drug, the high of being able to be stimulated. Nadia, can we use the next slide, please? So I'm hoping that this makes sense. It's a little bit like talking on the radio or talking with your eyes closed. You can't see what people are feeling. So I just have to assume that you're all loving it. So the next slide is a brain slide, and Tyler Page put the graphic together for me. I said, put together a really cool slide that shows how the brain connects with each other. And so the thing that we often forget about the brain is everything that we get from our environment filters through a series of gates. And that series of gates that it filters through is it comes in through your ears and your eyes largely, and then it triggers your frontal cortex, which processes this, and then it goes through a series of different structures in your brain, a little bit like the dots that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. Now, there's a couple of pieces there. There's what's called the prefrontal cortex that filters all of the information that comes in, and then it goes into an area called the amygdala, which is a little box. And that box either gives you a normal, very high, or very low emotional response. So if your amygdala over-responds, you can be very brave or you can be very fearful, but you feel emotions really intensely. So you take a person like me, everything is pretty good. Like, how are you? Score out of 10, happy? 2. How are you? Score out of 10, miserable? 2. You take another person and you say, how are you doing today? And they say, I'm absolutely fantastic. I'm a score of 9. And then there's no rusks and they're a -8. And so your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and how they function filter how you respond. There's some people who are listening, you're thinking, yeah, this is okay. I'm learning, but not so much. And there's others that are saying, that's absolutely fantastic. And then 2 minutes later, I'm so bored. I wish this was over. And those are the 2 ways that the amygdala regulates our emotions. And it does that. So I'm going to apologize. If I pause for a second, it's because it's time for my daily cat scan, which means the cat is howling and I need to let it in so that it doesn't scratch on the door. So I've got I've got 2 cats, one of which is still young and very vocal. So if I disappear for a second and you see the picture behind me of Hafe, you know that I've just gone to let the cat. And so I said, just give me a second. Thank you. Sorry, real life gets in the way. And it could be our kids, it could be our environment, it could be a circumstance. We have to realize that there's a degree of fluidity that we need to have in our days in order not to be too rigidly structured. And the more rigidly structured we are, the more we feel the negative stresses that create the frustrations that we've got. So you'll see that there's a couple of areas of the brain, and the reason that I've put them up is because, and there's a book, for those of you who've got nothing else to do, there's a great book called Superhuman. Superhuman is a very accessible book that talks about our ability to remember, concentrate, focus, be motivated, links it to different parts of the brain. It also links it to the fact that if you meditate or focus or practice, you are going to get physical changes in your brain. So, for example, if you speak 2 or 3 or 4 different languages, your thickness of your hippocampus increases and your likelihood of getting Alzheimer's decreases. If you focus on focus, if you practice on being attentive, mindful, and present, your anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, the area around that begins to thicken, which gives you more ability to focus. It gives you more ability to concentrate. If you work on processes of managing your adrenaline, your amygdala becomes more responsive and your highs and lows become more manageable. So we do know that meditative practice or reflective practice or learning fundamentally changes brain structure. And in changing brain structure, it changes the way you cope with what are perceived to be positive and negative stresses and improves your performance. So that's a great book to read. If you don't believe me, you can read that book. If you do believe me, you can read that book anyway. If you don't like reading, well, that's also fine. So let's go on to the next slide. I use this image often, speak the truth even when your voice shakes, because the reason that we get frustrated is in terms of a clinical term called cognitive dissonance, where there's a disconnect between what we feel and how we act. And the more we have the disconnect between how we feel and how we act, the more we're going to get a hormonal cascade through the body. So if you sit and you think really pleasant thoughts and you begin to relax, you have a hormonal cascade that drives that. And those feelings of calmness are driven by your hormones. If I ask you on the other side of it to think about something you really dislike, and you close your eyes and you visualize it. Now, I'm a spider and snakes and bugs and dirt under my fingernails person. So for me, that causes hormonal cascades of relaxation. But for you, if there was a spider walking across the bridge of your nose, it might create a different sense of cascade. And so perspective is really important. I find that my biggest anxieties come where what my truth is and what I'm saying are different. So in terms of radical candor, I had the pleasure of working with a really, really capable advocate and barrister at the International Criminal Court, a chap by the name of Philip Sands. You can look up Philip Sands. He's the author of some significantly well-constructed legal books on environmental law and corporate law and commercial law. But then he wrote a book called East-West Street, which is a book on the genesis of crimes against humanity and genocide. And so he takes a journey of his own personal journey with his father and his grandfather studying at a particular law school. And he walks the reader through that journey of 1905 to 1950, which is where ultimately, through the lessons learned out of the Second World War, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was developed. And so in talking to him, I realized a couple of things about how we speak. And the first is that words matter. the words we use are important. And choosing the right words matters. So words matter. Now, words by themselves don't help because words without context are often lost. You can use the same word in a different context. I love you and I love you can mean different things in different contexts. So if I'm in a family environment where I say to all of you, I really love you, this was fantastic. That's words in a context, right? But if I'm on a dark street and I walk up behind you and I don't know you and I say, I really love you, same words, different context. Make sense? So I say that because silence is not consent. Usually if somebody doesn't respond to you, it's not because they agree, it's because they vigorously disagree and they don't want to speak up. And that's either because they don't feel confident or you haven't created the right environment. So the words we choose, the manner in which we use them within where we use them and who we use them with and the response we get is powerful. So silence is also an answer. And that brings me to, it's always personal. Sometimes if somebody doesn't respond, or so we talk about this by being affirmative or passive responses, or a response by commission, something you do, or a response by omission, something you leave out. I think that the point that I'm trying to make is as we work in this world where our normal is slightly different. And I got into a lot of trouble the other day because we did a portfolio release for a group where we said it's life as usual. And the pushback was, it's not life as usual, it's life unusual. I said, really? You still wake up in the morning. You still should be doing your personal hygiene. You still should be doing your social hygiene. You still need to be engaging with everyone every day. You still need to be exercising in some way. You still need to be stimulating yourself. You still need to be eating well. That's life as usual. It's environment unusual, but it's life as usual. So I want you to think about that because your life really hasn't changed in the sense that everything that you do to keep yourself whole, sane, authentic, and truthful should still be there. And very much to Gerald's point, developing emotional intelligences or augmenting your emotional intelligence, your EQ skills is really important because we've got the IQ piece, we can rationalize it to death, but applying it in a sensitive way in the right context is the EQ component that plays a big role. So that's the 4. And I call it the 4 because there's 4 points to it. So on the next slide, you're going to see that there's a 3. And this 3 is on introspection. And you'll see that sign is above, I think it's Liverpool Station in London. That's the neon sign above the main entrance. I want my time with you. And part of that is everyone wants a share of time with you. One of the questions is, do you spend enough time with you? And so learning to like yourself again, responding to other people, finding the areas which are your touch or your uncomfortable points are very much a piece of your time with yourself. So back in the late 90s, it's in Pancreas Station. Thanks, Celine. She would know this because she's based out in that area. So I found that, and this was me, in my family, there's always one. In my family, I got 2 brothers, and if everyone wanted Coke, I wanted Fanta. If everyone wanted hot dogs, I wanted a hamburger. If everyone went left, I went right. So there is always one. And that one might be you. You might in your family unit, or you might in your social unit, or you might in your work unit be that one. The question is, if you are that one, how do you communicate that using the right words in the right context to other people? And Linda says, it's her and her family, and it's definitely me and mine. And it's me in my workspace. My godson said to me, hey, for everyone else, there's massive changes with social isolation. For you, it's every day as usual. Because that's how I roll. I like being by myself. I draw my energy that way. But most people don't. And a lot of people need social engagement and interaction with each other. So if we were all sitting in a room now, I would ask you to leave and come back and sit in a different seat. And you'd all look at me and say, no, but this is my seat. I said, well, why is it your seat? It doesn't have your name on it. You don't own the seat. You didn't bring the seat in. And it's because change is hard. It doesn't take weeks or months to get into or out of a habit. It takes one decision. So how many of you are sitting in the same way, in the same structure, doing your Zoom in the same way? And probably all of you, and that's fine, because you would say to your spouse, but this is my seat for Zoom. This is where I'm working. Change is hard. And one of the challenges that I think we face in social isolation and the perceived restrictions that we have, and some of the real restrictions that we have, is you had to change your buying styles, your socializing styles, your compensation styles. And that's very hard to do. And then the third one that goes with that is ambiguity is my friend. You can't know stuff. And even if you do know stuff, it will change. So we're socially stressed right now. Why are we stressed in a negative way? Because we want to know what's going on. And we're intensely curious about the geopolitical and environmental and economic impacts and what the fiscal and monetary and financial responses will be. But actually, we didn't care about those 3 weeks ago, by and large. It didn't really matter what our finance minister was negotiating with the Ghanaian finance minister, with the International Monetary Fund on stimulus relief and debt and debt uplift. It didn't matter because it wasn't part of our day, but because now we are looking to create structure, we are trying to squeeze all the ambiguity out of our lives. And the more we try and squeeze out that ambiguity, the more we have to accept change, and the more we rebel against that in terms of our hormonal structures, which gives us more adrenaline, which gives us high cortisol levels, which makes us more restless and irritable. And I say that it's none of you, of course, and it's definitely not me. I'm as happy as I could be, in theory. And that's denial. Because we live in a space where we say everything is fine and I'm actually coping okay. One of the sets of articles that you can read, if you are interested in that kind of thing, is there's a medical journal that I did some content review on recently, which is called the Lancet. Now, the Lancet published this month, so I think on the 13th or the 14th of April, they published an article on the effects of quarantine on how we feel. How did they get all of that information? They looked back over the last 20 years worth of quarantine environments and the surveys that were done post-quarantine on asking people how they coped. And what comes out of that, very candidly, is that people have long-term residual stress after the fact that, or post, the perceived restrictions on their lifestyles. And sometimes after the actual restrictions. After you've been told that you have to stay home every day, you have a 3 to 6 month post-traumatic stress sensation. And these are some of those things that you might feel, like you're demotivated. It's hard to get your work done, or you're ambivalent about doing work, or your social hygiene drops and cleanliness becomes less important, or cleanliness becomes absolutely important and everything has to be absolutely perfect. How many of you redid your underwear and sock drawers? Just saying. Some of you might have, and you might have ordered things by color or packed the fridge by age of food, or the absolute opposite. You haven't made your bed in 3 weeks. So I'm not only speaking to Shireen, but I'm speaking I'm actually speaking to me. This is my introspection. And so watering your plants and vacuuming and cleaning. She's washed her curtains. Absolutely. We drive ourselves in as many ways as we can to limit our ambiguity. Because the more we feel that we've got control, the less we're in the fear bucket of that slide that I showed you earlier, and the more we go into the learning buckets. So Nadia, on the next slide, which is the slide number 2, there's something called the golden rule, if you look in literature. And the golden rule, which goes back actually to Matthew's verse 7, I think, if you a Christian, and there's an equivalency in almost all the religions that I know of. And there's a social rule that says, do unto others. And it says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, you can get into a lot of trouble with it. And I'll give you an example. My middle brother and myself have always just bonded so beautifully in the we don't get along phase. So what happened is one day I was asked by my dad to make peanut butter sandwiches for him. Now, I don't like butter. So for me, the perfect peanut butter sandwich is lightly toasted with peanut butter with no butter. So I did unto him as I would have him do unto me. But I got into real trouble with my dad, who says, how can you make a sandwich without butter? Everyone loves butter. Do it how you're told. And sometimes the golden rule needs to be, do unto others as they want done to themselves. And in a time of crisis like this, where we're all feeling a bit brittle, if we go back to words matter and context counts, how often do you really ask the person, how would you like this done? And because we don't ask the other person, our expectations and their expectations aren't aligned with each other. So now I give you something that you don't necessarily want. Now you're unhappy. So based on the EQ conversation we were having earlier, you take the straight line approach versus the gentle approach, and now my adrenaline rises, your adrenaline rises. We're both in a negative stress environment, and our addictions kick in. I go have a drink. You go have a smoke, if you've got any cigarettes or alcohol left. Or I go and I just do something that's potentially completely in my deep character, but outside of my modified character, because I'm trying to compensate for the frustration of not connecting with you or having you not connect with me. So that's what Be Present is about for me, is about pausing enough to listen and hear and respond to the other person's need in a way that they want, and being able to communicate what you want. Because the hardest question I've ever been asked in my entire life, and that's in corporate and in social, is this question. And I'd like you to think about it, and we're going to end with this. What do you want? Imagine that. Imagine being able to say what you want. And the picture on the right-hand side is we've always been socially in close proximity and disconnected from each other. So that picture of what is it? I've got to move my screen. 1916 and 2016 are quite interesting to show the reality of how we transact and how we spend our time. But equally, those are both times just before a significant health event. And so we do remain largely disconnected from each other. And we do remain largely self-isolatory, but preferably in close to each other. And those of you with spouses, you'll know this, and partners, is I don't want to talk to you, but don't go far away. So don't be in the room, but I want to hear you breathing next door so that I know you're still around. And so Nadia, the next slide, which takes us to the one, is know yourself. Henry Thoreau is somebody who's given me great mirth over the years. He was a philosopher who wrote, amongst others, a book called Walden back in 1851. And his comment there, it's not what we look at that matters, it's what we see. So this is one of my godchildren and loved ones on the right-hand side. And for her, going up the mountain, and you'll know where that is, those of you that spend time up the mountain. My condition with her is when we spend time together, we've got to lace our shoes and we either climb up Nursery Ravine or Skeleton's Gorge. We spend time out in nature with no mobile phones except for pictures. So absolutely know thyself. And that's where the respect comes from. When you know who you are and you know what motivates and stimulates you, you are much more likely to be gentle and kind. And if you're gentle and kind to others and you're gentle and kind to yourselves, whenever you start to feel that sense of being overwhelmed, you're then able to pause and ask oneself, is this about me or is this about them? And it's actually always about you. When somebody makes you mad, it's your fault. Just like when somebody makes you happy, it's your fault. And it's your fault or you own it in the sense that the response that you have to your environment is entirely your own. No one else can influence how you process the information that comes in. It's yours. You own it. Some of you might have looked at me and liked me immediately just on image, and some of you might have looked at me and said, that guy's dodgy. Some of you might have said, gosh, wouldn't it be great if he shaved or had a haircut, or maybe he should grow his beard more, or not wear glasses that are refractive. And based on that, you end up creating a library or catalog of what you believe is right or wrong. Now, again, as we go through books, there's an investigative journalist who's written a series of interesting books called, his name is Malcolm Gladwell. His first book is relevant to what's going on in terms of the pandemic, and he called that the tipping point. And it's really about how many people or how much consciousness it takes to go from being non-conformist to being mainstream. And once it goes mainstream, it's normal, or it's an epidemic. And he uses the cholera epidemic, but he also uses some fashion examples and some chair examples and some food examples of how we reach a point where suddenly after that point, everyone knows about it. His second book is a book called Blink, and it's on decision making. Basically, what he says in decision making is this. He says that you have within your emotional checklist a list of good and bad things. And the first time you meet somebody, or the first time you listen, or in the first sentences that are heard, you make a decision about whether something is positive or negative. And two examples of what he did is and I'll give you a third one. And Shireen, you primed everyone earlier. You said, oh, Brad is blah, 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 blah. If you said, listen, we've had to use Brad because our real speaker of the day actually canceled, who was really good, and this guy, we don't really know him, and he's probably maybe okay. People's expectations would have been completely different from the way you did it, the introduction. And as a consequence of that, the adoption of the information I'm sharing with you would have been different. That's called priming. Priming also happens, and they did a lot of great studies with this, is where they put words that related to age in a paragraph. And they videoed students walking into a room, and then they read the paragraph and they videoed them walking out of the room. And where the paragraph created subliminal and subtle messages of age, when the students walked out the rooms, they moved as if they were older than when they walked in the rooms. So priming is not only in what we hear, it's also in what we read. So the messages we write to each other, and we very much now a text tone society. How often do you, and some of you, I know none of you are doing it now, but some of you might do it with other speakers, is just text each other and say, oh, here's some WhatsApp, and I see the chats running through, so we've got notes coming through. We communicate with each other on text. That communication plus our visual stimulation gives us priming or gets us ready for how we think we should respond, part A. And then part B is there's something called thin slicing that says, I've done this before, and because I've done this many times before, and some of the authors call it the 10,000 hours of learning. Daniel Kahneman, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about the two minds that we use in terms of interpreting data. There's quite a lot of information. Malcolm Gladwell in his book, Blink, speaks about this. He speaks about it in terms of thin slicing, that you use your past experience to instantly make an interpretation of how you're going forward. Now that's fine, except that it creates intrinsic bias. Now there's a group out of the US that does a lot of work on this, and they call these scotomas or blind spots. And the consequence is you have a blind spot to something because you've made a decision about it historically, so it's always there. And often stigma and discrimination come through in that space. And we saw that through HIV and AIDS in the early parts of that pandemic. And that pandemic has killed nearly 40 million people, just by context. So what we found during that stage is that early on, if somebody said they were HIV positive, you didn't want to touch them, you didn't want to sit in the chair that they'd sat in, because there was that stigma or the bias that you could get affected by proximity. And as we go through this pandemic, because we don't know what our stigmas and biases are, our historic ones, our scotoma or our blind spots come through. And that's something in knowing oneself that one needs to work quite hard on. So as we go to the final slide, I promise to stop talking in about 2.5 hours, is the note that says, using only one word, what do you need right now? And that's a check-in you can do with yourself at any time of the day. So I want to share with you 2 tools that I've used that I find are useful, especially when your adrenaline is up. And the first one is this, hugs. Yeah, with or without social distancing, Marianne. I'm teasing. So here's 2 tools. The first tool, when we spoke about this very early in the conversation, we said we tend to have adrenaline spike when we're in unknown situations. So my question to you is, how long is a minute? And many of you will say, well, a minute is 60 seconds. And I would ask the question then, how long is 60 seconds? So take this exercise with me now. For 1 minute, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to close your eyes and sit absolutely still. Try not to count. And for those of you whose videos I can see, I'll know you counting because your head goes up and down. Like 1, 2, 3, 4. Try not to count because that defeats this. But what I'd like you to do is close your eyes and try and feel how long a minute is. Let's start now. And if you can still see me, your eyes are open. If you started fidgeting around about now, you're in the 15 to 20 second zone, which is where most people who have ambient or fairly high levels of stress begin to fidget. At this point, the majority of you are saying, it's got to be a minute now. And we're at 30 seconds. And here we're clocking into 45. It's a long time, hey? I'm looking at some of the people who are looking back at me and saying, yeah, we realize that you're coming up on a minute round about now. So some of you might keep your eyes closed because you're sleeping. And for those of you that aren't sleeping, what I would suggest that you do is on the hour, every hour, unless you're driving or cooking or walking up the stairs, close your eyes for 1 minute. What you'll find is when you feel like you're stressed or when you're a bit agitated, that minute will reduce down to 15 seconds and swing down between 15 and 30. And when you're in your normal pace of day, it'll be between 25 and 45 seconds. It's only when you're calm or you're being channeled or challenged that you'll find that it sits at around 50 to 60 seconds. It's a good test to see how you are. Now I started doing this. I watched there was a movie, a TV show called Blue Thunder back on in the late 1980s when I was still in high school. And the helicopter pilot used to close his eyes for a minute before he started, before he got in the helicopter. So I've been doing that now for nearly 40 years. And my lesson on this has been that when we're agitated, when we're stressed, our perception of time changes. It's called the adrenaline cycle. And when we're in this adrenaline hurry mode, nothing happens fast enough. And you'll experience that in the traffic. How many of you drive casually and then it's so long for the traffic light to change? Or you try and phone somebody and what's taking so long? Why haven't they answered the phone? And it's only rung 3 times. Those are signs that you need to pause and take a minute. And Shireen, at this point, we've been going for 55 minutes. And we said you'd asked me, through Linda, to leave a couple of minutes for questions and chats. So I hope this has been useful and insightful for you. I'm very insecure. I need lots of feedback. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Brad. Wow, that has been really, really amazing. Before we get on to questions and answers, I just want to check with you, Brad. Are you going to be staying with us for our networking after the questions and answers?
I hadn't planned to. Unfortunately, I've got back-to-back sessions today, but I'm very happy at any time to log back in and have another chat.
Perfect. And would you be okay with us sharing your presentation? Because there's been a few questions about asking for the presentation to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. You can share it. As you can see, there's not a lot of information in it, but it really just gives you the guidance pieces.
Thank you so much. We've also been recording the session, so it would be great for people to just recap and refer back to it.
So I can't deny everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, wow, what an informative presentation and quite a lot of take-home value. We've got the chat going, so I think maybe if we take 3 or 4 questions, please post your questions onto the chat and Brad will be able to choose from the questions that have been posted and possibly try and answer those. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and post them onto the chat.
Equally, Shireen, I think if it's useful, we could unmute everyone, and if people want to make a comment or a statement about it, this is a good way to stimulate that conversation, because I think a lot of what one of us might think, a lot of us experience.
100%. Nadia, so if you could please unmute everybody. I think for Zoom purposes, what works best is if you put up your hand, there is a raise hand button on the right-hand side where you see everybody's names listed. So if you raise your hand, then Brad can have a look at that and then he can ask you to chat. Brad, are you seeing any raised hands?
I'm not seeing raised hands. I'm not a great technology experienced person. Thank you for the positive comments, by the way. For those of you that have posted, say that you've enjoyed it. That means a lot to me. I was going to tease and say you've seen me drinking. Kerry, you've got a raised hand.
I do. I just wanted to just go on about the points that you mentioned about pausing. And this is something I've been thinking about the last couple of days that has been so good for me. Instead of being reactive, is to just take that pause. And it's actually got me through a lot of situations with regards to making a quick decision. Instead of doing that, to just, even if it's for 15 seconds, just take a step back and breathe and then go back into the situation. And it's really, really worked so well for me. Being the loud person I am, it's for me to learn how to take a step back has been difficult. But in saying that, I've actually learned so much. So that's really a valid point that you've made. And I've learned a lot from that in the last couple of days, just personally.
Kerry, thanks for sharing that. And if I may just build on that very briefly, and adapt from a Murray and Roberts health and safety campaign back in the early 2000s. They had a campaign called Stop, Think, Act. And I really like that. And we use that a lot on some of the COVID educational programs that we're running now, because often we just run from stimulus into response to stimulus into response. And by being able to pause and stop, or pause, think, and act, and reflect on it, and then respond to it, it's a very powerful way. Marianne? Hi. Are you waving or just scratching?
No. I'm good.
Okay.
I've got something that I'd like to say. It's Sophia.
Hi, Sophia.
So I not only, but I think I get the most stressed when I lose that clear picture of what's next. So I kind of feel that when it is good or bad, but I know where it is going, I'm okay, I'm in control. Doesn't matter if it's negative or positive, at least I know it. Mm-hmm. So that clarity is gone. So what I do, and that's exactly what happened yesterday, so that's why I'm using this example, I actually left my flat. I went outside in the parking lot of my building, and I called people that has nothing to do with the unclarity in my life, but I told them my problem, and separately they gave me an answer, the same answer. And And it took me about an hour. So I called these people who I really trust. They are my friends. And I told them my situation. I said, what do you think? And they all gave me the same answer. So basically, they gave me reassurance on how I should react to this stress, because for them it was so obvious. And to them, it was the same answer. So what I'd like to say from that is sometimes it's really, really good to get another point of view, somebody who has nothing to do with that, and that really pause and just tell them just ask, what do you think about it? Think I'm right or wrong? And don't just do it with one person, do it at least 3 people, and you'll be surprised that they really give you the same obvious answer that you've been looking for.
Absolutely. So, what great feedback. So true. And we call those check-ins. Mm-hmm. And what you may want to do is say, and we in business we have morning and evening check-ins, where whether you're doing it as a scrum or a stand-up or an informal check-in or a Zoom, is you start the day by saying, where are we? And you end the day by saying, where were we? So that you've got that orientation. But you may also, as a tool, because when you're really stressed, you run out of the insight as to who to call for what. And you may have a phone a friend list, so that when you need a check-in, you can actually go through your call list and say, okay, I'm going to call A and then B and then C, and then I'm going to reflect on that and have the validation. So great example, Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. We've got one more question from Pete. So Pete, if you can please refer your question to Brad.
Hi, Shireen, it's Piet.
Yes,
so you mentioned that you have back-to-back sessions, and looking at your website, I see you talk of leadership there. So is that the back-to-back sessions? You help people in their own leadership in their company, or what does that entail?
Correct. So what I learned, and I learned this, I spent several years working in welfare in Cape Town. And one of the chaps I spoke to, who I'd met years back through YPO, a chap called Arthur Gillis. And Arthur said to me, Brad, you're not a corporate person. You actually need a portfolio lifestyle. So what I did is I set up a group of initiatives, one that focuses on health and safety and employee assistance programs and lifestyle, employment-based, one that focuses on this kind of work that we're doing now, leadership mastery and support, and then a conflict resolution group where we find that people are so quick to sue and box with each other and very slow to mediate and try to find conciliation and common ground. That's the thread or the bridge that I walk across.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. It was really, really good. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. What a privilege to be with all of you.
Yeah, Brad, from the Cape Chamber, we really want to thank you for your insight, for your time. There's been some comments from everybody in terms of saying how valuable this is. One particular comment that started early on in your presentation is that somebody said, wow, thank you for the humanness. The fact that you went out and you had to get your cat out is that, looking at your CV and all your accolades, we look at you and we think, oh my gosh, this person, I wouldn't be able to socialize with this person. But knowing that you're human and just like all of us having to deal with our dogs and our cats and pets and kids and husbands and all of those kinds of things, it really makes your story more relative and really, to every one of us. So thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it. I mean, some people have been saying, is this the first of many to come? We really hope we could have you back here again, and we wish you well. Please keep safe, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. And Marianne, nice cat.
Beautiful.
Bye, everyone.
Here's Brad. Thank you so much.
Yes, Brad.
So ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are still online, there are now 36 of us, and I'm sure some people may be dropping off. We are running a little bit late. However, as usual, the Cape Chamber, what we do is for the Central Chapter Committee is that we do networking. And I think that it's very important that we still network during these times. Meeting new people is really something that can get you motivated and can get you going. You may, something might just spark from what somebody else is saying. So please stay online. We are going to be breaking up. into a few groups. Nadia is going to break us up about 3 or 4 people per group, and we're going to be having 5 minutes to be able to network. So that doesn't give you a lot of time. So remember our networking rules with regards to introduce yourself, what is your name, what is the business's name, and then what are you looking for at the moment in terms of business or clients or ideas, and then end off again with your name in your smaller group. So Nadia, I will leave the rest up to you.
We're outside. It's so cold. It's quite chilly.
Very chilly.
So we've got
Nadia?
20, we've got 22. Now you'll find yourself in a room with 45. Should happen in a couple of seconds. Natalie?
Hey there.
No,
Sorry, I had a bit of a connectivity issue there.
that's fine, because now I've just gotten a shock to see that there's 2 unassigned. Kerry, you're unassigned.
Yeah, I was sorry. I was in a meeting and I got disconnected, and I was with Luther.
Okay,
And
I'm going to assign you to a room now.
Okay.
Can I assign you to a room now, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you guys just need to join. It's been assigned. It just says not joined yet.
Hey.
Hello, I've moved you into another room.
Yeah, I was in that room and it was with Blue 601 and they weren't talking. It was just one person.
I've moved you. You should disappear soon, but we've only got 1 minute left.
Okay.
Some people haven't accepted, so they haven't joined the room. So 1 minute remaining.
Natalie, are you there?
I've even tried to chat to Natalie, sending her a chat privately, so she hasn't joined the room. So if they don't accept, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll close the room soon.
Okay, cool. It's nice chatting to you, though.
That was a really good chat with.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm glad we've got it recorded.
Yeah.
I liked when he said, ask how you want it done, because often we go, well, we're just going to take the initiative and we're going to do it the way we feel we should.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. Okay, I think I should. Yeah, Natalie hasn't joined, and you haven't joined, and Andrew Minar hasn't joined.
Well, I did join a room.
Yeah, and then you only had one person.
Yeah, and they weren't talking. It was just like.
Okay, I'm going to close the rooms now. I think my 1 minute's up, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, they've got 60 seconds and then everybody will return.
Cool.
And then I'll just save this recording on S Drive.
Cool.
Okay, everyone's coming back.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Sorry, Simon, we got cut off. And Rolinda.
No problem. Thank you. I
No
think
problem.
I got the answer from you.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think how many we started with Nadia with 22. Is that yeah?
On the chat, yes, but on the session, I think this has been our biggest virtual event so far. We had 57, I think, at one stage.
57, that's right. Yeah. So thank you so much to the 20 that are left behind. We really appreciate the fact that you've stayed online. And, you know, just to finish off, I'd really just love to do a couple of thanks to everybody that's here. So firstly, Nadia, I would love to thank you for, so Nadia Singh, for those of you that don't know, she's from the Cape Chamber. She does PR and marketing and a host of various other things within the Cape Chamber. I think everybody's pulling everything at the moment. And thank you so much for hosting this Zoom event. You know, these kinds of meetings are new to everybody and we're all learning together and, you know, we're here to support each other. So thank you so much. And then to the infamous Linda Ruppen from the Cape Chamber as well. Thank you for all your coordinating. Definitely big claps for Linda. Thank you for all your coordinating, emails, your reminders, setting up the Zoom meeting and so on and so forth. We really wouldn't be able to do this without you, Linda, and we really thank you for that. And then to every one of you, you know, all of our members, everybody that's participating and still keeping in contact, we really thank you for your time and your commitment to the Chamber. You know, we wouldn't be able to be the Cape Chamber if we didn't have members like you supporting us. So thank you so much for your time. And then obviously Brad's logged off already, but, you know, thank you to Dr. Brad Beira for his time and his information, very informative. I think we all found some value in it, and Linda's definitely going to distribute the video recording, maybe through WeTransfer if it's a big file, as well as the presentation, so that you can all refer back to that. But really, and hopefully we can get him back sometime soon, because there's going to be all sorts of stress and anxieties when we go back to work eventually. You know, we're going through all of these motions. Jason, you have something to say?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with other Jason.
So let's go Jason Sandler first, and then Jason Lafleur.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say, if you're going to share the file, don't share it on WeTransfer. Rather, put it onto something like Dropbox, and then just give us the option if we want to go and collect it or not, rather than sending then whoever wants to go onto it can get it, rather than on WeTransfer where you have to go and download it, especially for those people who are in dodgy data areas at the moment.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for that suggestion. We'll definitely take that into consideration. Jason Lafleur, did you have something you want to say?
No, all good. No, thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. So guys, just to end off, a couple of points that I've taken from Brad's presentation today. And one thing I think that stood out for me is the hardest thing is putting your feet on the floor and making up your bed. It's that first step. So once you've gotten past that first step, just take it one step at a time. That's all that we need at the moment, is taking things one step at a time and not putting too much pressure on yourself. The other thing that I took off is, who do you choose to be during COVID-19? And this is currently as well as post-COVID-19. Are you in the fear zone? Are you in the learning zone? Or are you in the growth zone? That's your choice, but have a look at where you are and see how you can move on to the next step from there. And what I'd love to end off with today is just to give you guys a little bit of a motivational quote, and hopefully you can take something from this. And it says, do your best and let the rest go. Sorry, just trying to navigate my PC. Do your best and let the rest go. You can't be perfect, no matter how hard you try. So give yourself credit for making an effort and try to stop stressing about the outcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much once again from the Cape Chamber. My name is Shireen Onia from Service Gurus. I am on the Central Committee. I'm proud to be a Cape Chamber member. I'm proud to be your MC today, and I wish you all well. Be safe, and please do not hesitate to contact the Cape Chamber if you have questions, if you need help, if you need anything in terms of helping your businesses. We are here to help you. This is where opportunity meets, and the Cape Chamber thanks you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shireen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.